Well, hey, good evening. Welcome to our midweek Bible study. If maybe this is the first time you've joined this Bible study, we want to welcome you. 2017, 2018, on Sunday mornings, I preached through many of the Psalms. And I love the series. I think it was, for a lot of people, it was one of their favorite series. I think the Psalms are such a vital part of our life. And so I absolutely loved preaching through it, but I didn't get to cover all of them. Obviously, it would take almost 3 years preaching every single Sunday to get through all the Psalms. And so earlier in the year, January, I started on Sunday nights preaching back through the Psalms that I missed. And since we're not meeting together on Sunday nights, just starting back on Sunday mornings, we want to have a midweek Bible study. I wanted to have something where we can continually feed each other and talk. And so today I want to invite you to turn to Psalm 13, and we're just going to continue making our way. I'm going to do Psalm 14 next week and 15, and then we'll skip a couple Psalms because I've taught several of those along this process. And so if you will, just look at Psalm 13. It's a Psalm of David. I'm going to read out of the ESV, as I always do. It's a short psalm, but I want you to just, as I read it, just kind of look for some of the things that are repeated. You're going to notice it very early on that there's a 4-part request or question that David asked. Look at verse 1. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord. I love this, because he has dealt bountifully with me. I will sing to the Lord because he has dwelt bountifully with me. Have you ever felt alone? Have you ever felt abandoned? It's interesting when you look at this passage because we're living in maybe at the end, for some, it's the end of a quarantine. For many of you, you're still in quarantine. And it's interesting to watch how people have responded to this time alone, this time of quarantine. Some of you, it's absolutely driven you crazy, okay? Especially those of you who are extroverts on steroids. You've struggled being alone, being away from people. I'm more of a natural introvert. I know people sometimes don't believe it because God has gifted me to be a pastor, and I have to get out of that shell. And so I'm comfortable. I'm at ease being with people and being in crowds because of the calling God's given me. But naturally, I'm much more comfortable alone. I'm much more comfortable in a small group of my family, or even just out somewhere with God and just away from everything. But some of you, this time has been difficult, and it's revealed some parts in your life, and maybe you've felt alone. Maybe you felt abandoned. You know, sometimes those feelings of abandonment come from family, from loved ones, sometimes from friends and others. Sometimes it's in a marriage relationship. Sometimes it's just moms and dads or children. Okay, but sometimes it's spiritual. And in this case, David feels abandoned, and I think he feels abandoned by God. It's interesting to me. We rarely talk about this. This is one of those things that even if we feel like we're abandoned by God, we're not telling anybody because we think we're wrong to say that. That's why I love David. David is willing to show us what he's going through. He's willing to tell us when he's struggling. Charles Spurgeon wrote, he has a 3-volume set on the Psalms, and it's incredible. If you want just a plethora of information, I'd encourage you to get Psalms, the Psalm series, Treasuries of David by Spurgeon. But he talks about the Psalms. And one of the things he says, when you dive into David's Psalms, there are many of them. When you dive into David's Psalms, you will somewhere or other see yourself. You get into it, you're going to find David feeling what you feel. You're going to see David experiencing what you experience. And Spurgeon said, he said, you never get into a corner. He's talking about in the Psalms. He said, you never find yourself into a corner where you don't find David already in that corner. And I love what he said. He said, I've never been so low that I've not found David lower. And I've never been so high that I've not found David higher. When we look at David's life, when we look at his relationship, when we look at the honesty of how he pours it out to God in the Psalms, we just see him sometimes at the top, sometimes at the bottom. This is one of those Psalms where he starts at the bottom and he ends on the top. It's an incredible little psalm, just 6 verses. But one person, I think it was a guy named Parker, said Psalm 13 begins in the winter and it ends in the summer. You see him in a difficult situation and he comes out rejoicing and singing before God. I mentioned last week about the 3 or several different commentaries, but there's a 2-part commentary. This is a small commentary set on the Psalms by Derek Kidner. And Kidner says that if you look, and every one that I read breaks this psalm up, and you can see it. There's 6 verses. It's broken into 3 sets of 2 verses, okay? So every verse, every 2 verses, you find a section, a verse of the psalm, okay? And it's interesting because the first 2 verses, we find David in the depths. And then he just begins to climb up out of those depths. And so as you're watching this and reading this, you see David 2 verses at a time moving from sorrow to song. And it's incredible. And we learn something in the middle of it of how he moves from that place to the next place. So I just want you to look at it with me. The first thing you see here is David's desolation. Okay, you could say David's sorrow. You could David's despair. You pick the word. Okay, but David is desolate right now. He is despaired. Look at it. He says, "How long, O Lord?" 4 times he says that. How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? He's talking to God. Notice he uses the covenant name for God. The Lord is all caps in the ESV, showing that he's talking about Yahweh. He says, how long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? David he's despairing. He's at the bottom. We don't know the situation. The title doesn't tell us. It's just a psalm written to the choir master. It's a song written to be sung in the public worship of the temple or the tabernacle of David's time. David is sitting here. He's having a struggle. And here's what I want you to see. It's not just a bad day. You know, you go through a bad day and you say, hey, man, it's going to be okay. Men might be more like, say, hey, just suck it up. You're going to make it. You know, come on, just pick yourself up. But this is not just a bad day. This is a series of bad days. This is a bad season. David's struggling. I mean, look at the questions outside of the how longs, okay? Will you forget me forever? Will you hide your face from me? Do I have to keep counsel in my soul, have sorrow in my heart all the time? Shall my enemy be exalted over me? David he's in this period of struggle. It's possible, maybe, I was just thinking this morning as I was studying this, that maybe David, this is the time when he's running away from King Saul. It's maybe the time that he's with the Gentiles and hiding from Saul. I mean, it could be the time that David is running from his son Absalom, but it would seem maybe at a younger time, maybe this is a time during David's sin. You know, maybe this is during the time of the sin with Bathsheba. We don't know. But David is in a period of struggling. He's a man, when you read the Psalms, who constantly seeks after the face of God. He is always looking after the face. I just wrote down a couple places in chapter 11, verse 7, chapter 17, verse 15, and 27, verse 40, verse 4 and verse 8, and chapter 34, verse 5. David is seeking after the face of God. So he's a man who seeks God's face. He's a man who seeks God's presence. And yet he says, how long will you hide your face from me? Have you ever felt like it's just, you're spiritually dry? I've been there. I've been in those places where I'm in the Word and I'm praying and I'm preaching and I'm doing, but man, it's just dry. And maybe you've been there. David's there. We call it depression. We call it other things, and those are legitimate reasons. But sometimes it's not a thing you can take a pill for. It's not a thing a psychiatrist, even though sometimes medicine's good. And also, I'm not trying to just downplay that, but sometimes it's just a spiritual dark night of the soul. You're doing everything right. You're walking and you're where you want to be. But it's like God's just, he's going to say, I'm going to see if you're going to seek me for my face and not just what I give you. Those are periods of time we see in all the saints' life, and David's there. What do you do when you get to that dark night of the soul? What do you do when you're struggling like this? David struggles, but he doesn't stay there. We move from his despair to his prayer. Okay? From his despair, we turn to prayer. And I didn't intentionally rhyme that, but there it is. From despair to prayer. I want you to think about, look at verses 3 and 4. Consider and answer me. This is David praying. Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I'm shaken. You know, Paul tells us to pray without ceasing. And David is praying. He's in despair. But rather than getting bitter and turning away from God, he's digging deeper. It's like he's just digging a foxhole and saying, I'm not moving from this place, God. I'm not walking away. I'm hurting, but I'm going to seek you. He's asking God to move, and he asks God to do 3 things. Let's look at it. Verse 3, consider. The idea is look at me. I think another translation says it that way. Look at me. And then secondly, answer me. Look at me, answer me, O Lord my God. And then he says, light up my eyes. So I think he's saying, consider me. Let's just do it this way. Look at me, answer me, enlighten me. Look at me, answer me, enlighten me. I love the depth of David's relationship with God. Do you remember, maybe as a parent, your child speaking to you, and you've got 1,500 things going on in your mind, and you're sitting there, and the child's talking, and I got 4 daughters, and man, sometimes it's it's just and sometimes I can just tune it out. I hate to admit it. Kim can tell you, I can just. It's like I've gone to the beach, you know. In my mind, I tune it out, and I remember there are times that my children would grab me by the face, and they'd turn, and they'd hold me and look at me in the eyes. Say, "Look at me, Daddy," and then they'd say it again. You know what they're doing? They're doing what David's doing with God. Consider me, God. Look at me. It's like, and David can't take God by the face. But it's like he's saying, God, I need you to look at me. I feel dry. I feel abandoned. And God, I need you to look at me. And I need you to answer me, God. I'm calling out to you. If you've ever prayed, you know what it's like. You know what it's like to call out to God and feel like he's not answering. He's not there. You just want to take him by the face and say, look at me, God. Answer me. I need you to open up my eyes. I need you to let me see what's going on here. I need to see you. I need to see you in the light of your glory. He's just speaking to God from the heart of a man who's in despair. You know, you look at this passage and he says, Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. You see how despair he is. He's asleep the sleep of death. What a poetic way of saying, light up my eyes. And listen, I'm going to die in this. I'm dying, God. And then he says, lest my enemies say, I've prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I'm shaken. David's not being self-centered here. He's not turning the attention, saying, God, I need you to move so I look good. I want you to remember this. David is God's king. He represents God's people. And if the enemies are saying, we prevailed, it's in their mind that their gods have prevailed over David's God. In their mind, they have prevailed over Yahweh's people. And David says, God, I can't bear that the enemy would say we've prevailed over him. I can't bear that they'll rejoice because I'm shaken. I need you. He's God, I'm asking you, look at me, answer me, light up my face so that I can see you. David prays. And then I want you to see what happens. Look at it, verses 1 and 2. He's in despair. How long, how long, how long? And then he comes to verses 3 and 4. He's praying, despair to prayer. And then in verses 5 and 6, we see a song. David's singing now. Look what he says. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully. He has, Kidner said that idea of dealt bountifully is that he has dealt with me completely. He's fixed this. He has fulfilled it. His light is back with me. This is not an overnight thing. Sometimes we go through this difficulty and we pray, and it's just like the next day we're back together. This is not one of those situations. The 4 how longs in verses 1 and 2 tell us that this was a long period of time. I don't want you to think that David's in the middle of despair, and then all of a sudden in verses 3 and 4, he just prays a prayer and immediately he's out of it. People will look at it that way and say, well, if I just had enough faith, I could get out of it too. I don't think that's the case here. David is in despair. He's going through struggle. He's praying. This is a period of time that he's climbing up out of this pit, and he's praying. And then as he prays, his eyes get off of the situation. He gets off of the pit. He's turning and he's looking toward God, and he's out of it. I think of David, or excuse me, Paul. I think it was Epaphroditus that he talks about. He's always wrestling for you in prayer. Sometimes prayer is a wrestle. Sometimes it's a wrestling match. Okay, it's wrestling. It's hand-to-hand combat, and I don't mean combat with God. I mean it's just in the spiritual forces where we're wrestling with God, wrestling like Jacob. He's hanging on. I'm not letting go of you until you bless me. That's wrestling. That's combat. That's fighting that good fight. That's what David does here. He's going to cling to God until God delivers. And you know what God does? He delivers him. This man who's in despair is now singing to the Lord. I think maybe the despair and the situation is still there, but because he's turned his eyes toward God, now he's able to rejoice in the suffering. He's going to see I talked about this Sunday, the redemptive value of suffering. There are times that the suffering is like the thorn that we're in our weakness, we're stronger. And when we see what God's doing, we cry out to him, we worship him, and we're able to be what he's called us to be and to walk with him and to fellowship with him. I don't know where you may find yourself today. I really don't. I know that many of you may be struggling. Maybe it's just you're lonely. Maybe it's you feel abandoned. Maybe it's not a person at all. You just feel dry. I want to encourage you. Get into the Word of God and stay in the Word, and don't give up on the Word. Stay in it. I think the Psalms are they are the greatest source of value for us as we look at His Word. You're watching this on the 17th. Okay, I want to encourage you to think about something. Read the 17th Psalm. Okay, the 17th day of the month. Read the 17th Psalm. And then at the end of the 17th Psalm, just add 30, okay? And read Psalm 47, okay? So Psalm 17, Psalm 47, add 30, go Psalm 77, okay? And as you read through it, you come to the end of Psalm 77, you read Psalm 107, okay? And then you read Psalm 37. So take whatever day of the week it is, month it is, read the first Psalm, 1 through 30, whatever day it is, add 30 and read 5 Psalms a day. Maybe that you read a couple in the morning, one at lunch, and a couple at night. But read those Psalms. I love what Don Whitney says about that. He says, read those Psalms, and one of them is going to speak to you. One of them is just going to bless you. It may be a Psalm 13, and you begin to pray that scripture back to God. I just want to encourage you to be in the Psalms. What I do is 1 through 30, I read it, and when I come to the day that it's Psalm 119, which is so long, I save that for the 31st day of the month, okay? So I'm going to encourage you, be in the Psalms, pray the Psalms, keep seeking God, and trust Him to get you where you think you want to be in your relationship with Him, where you need to be in your worship of Him, where you need to be in the walking of the fruit of the Spirit. Church, I love you. I can't wait to see you Sunday. I hope God is blessing you, and I hope that this psalm has helped you. If I can help you, please let me know. Take care. God bless you.